Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 158 of the Kiss Army Nation podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Pasquale Veri.
And I am Torres Pera. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Listen, Kiss has transcended many genres, not only in music, but in film, television, and comic books. They have put their brand name on almost everything. Indeed, Kiss has become a huge part of pop culture. So you can imagine, when I saw the promo for the upcoming book, Creatures of the Screen, A History of KISSplotation on film, television, and home video, I had to learn more. What better way to do that than with its author, our next guest? Kiss Army, please welcome freelance writer, author, film historian, and pop culture archaeologist, John Harrison. Welcome to the show, my new friend.
Thank you very much, Pasquale and Claudio. Very nice to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Hello to all the listeners as well and the watchers.
This is great, John. So thanks for taking the time with you. And, we wanted to kick off with this interesting concept, that KISSplotation. And we will dive into that soon. But first, let's talk about the man behind this concept. So can you tell us about your interest and love for exploitation movies?
Sure. So I grew up, I guess, in the late 70s, as a kid, before home video came along. And growing up in Australia, we didn't really have much in the way of television channels. We had like 3 commercial TV channels and that was it. So, I had to rely on whatever was showing on TV. And like a lot of kids, I grew up really attracted to, horror, science fiction, fantasy movies, comic books. I loved the old Batman TV series from the 60s when that was on in repeats. And, during school holidays, my parents would let me set up the little camp bed in the lounge room so I could just lay there and watch the all-night movies all night and then just turn off the, roll over and turn off the telly when I got tired. So that was like a really sort of strong sort of film upbringing for me. And then as I sort of got into my younger teen years, the 80s started and then home video came along. And with home video, there were a lot of like low budget sort of smaller companies that were just raiding any kind of old film vaults, just looking for any kind of like, horror exploitation material that they could like whack out on video. So that led to like me discovering a whole new range of sort of these really sort of low budget exploitation horror stuff, the type of things they'd never show on TV over here and stuff that I'd never read about, even in magazines like Famous Monsters of Filmland and Fangoria and Starlog and all that. Wasn't really until probably the mid-80s when a book came out called The Psychotronic Encyclopedia of Film, written by a guy from New York called Michael J. Weldon. And that really sort of covered, the more obscure stuff. And it really ran the gamut of covering everything from like beach party movies from the 60s to the biker movies of the late 60s to the teenage monster movies of the 50s and, the slasher movies of the 80s. And that really sort of, made me realize, well, I'm not alone in my love for all this stuff.
Right. And, the love for those kind of movies that you mentioned before, it's obvious that it's not mainstream. So is that maybe one of the reasons that got you into a band like Kiss?
I guess in a way, again, I was growing up, I was already like a big horror and science fiction movie fan and a comic book fan. And when I first discovered Kiss, I do talk about it in my intro to the book. It was when I was 12 and we had like a party at my house, which was for my older sister's engagement party to her boyfriend, now husband, Stephen. And for the party, he brought along a stack of his own albums from his house. And one of those albums was Kiss Alive. Oh. And I remember him putting it on and he was sort of telling me all about the band, about how they, they never show their faces and all the effects and, the blood spitting and all that. And I just sat there like listening to it, just mesmerized and just, staring at the album cover and looking at the notes inside, from the band and the back cover with this like just sea of people just there. And just hearing that initial like explosion of juice and all the bombs, and I remember the next day, everyone was like sleeping off their hangovers and I was just in the lounge room just playing Kiss Alive over and over again. And because of that, my brother-in-law and my sister brought me, firstly, he went and taped Kiss Alive as well as the first Kiss album for me, so I could listen to them all the time. I only had like a little portable Sanyo in my bedroom, but it was still good enough. And then they brought me a Destroyer shirt. And, you know, as again, around that time, 12, 13, you know, it's when you're starting to, you know, get into music. And, you know, I was sort of wanting to find, I guess, you know, my band. You know, I knew my sister's music. You know, she listened to stuff like Slade and The Sweet and Alice Cooper, David
Oh,
Bowie. So I was
okay.
already sort of into the, you know, the whole glam rock thing. But then once Kiss came along, you know, again, it was like, well, I finally found my band, you know, and at that point, again, this is like 1977, 78. So Kiss were huge in America, but not many people really knew about him in Australia at the time. They hadn't yet
Correct.
broken, you know, massively big. So, you
Yeah.
know, so it was great, you know, it was like the perfect match of like, you know, the fantasy aspect, along with just the great music. You know, the music was, you know, what sort of kept me to the band, you know, over the decades, pretty much, you know,
Well,
even
that's
through
good.
the 80s, you know, the unmasked 80s, you know, I was still like hanging out for every album and, you know, buying it on release day and, you know, still telling everybody, you know, no, Kiss aren't, because over here, once they toured in 1980, they pretty much, their popularity just plummeted. And through the 80s, a lot of people were like, Kiss, you know, I mean, they're still around. You know, I'd be like, no, you got to listen to them. You know, they're great. You know, the
Hmm.
makeup's off, but it's just great hard rock. You know, if you're not listening to it just out of a bias, you're really, you know, denying yourself some good hard rock music.
Yeah, and that, actually, that many people do. You know, they still do that. They have still that bias. But I was thinking, what an introduction! What a way to get into Kiss with Kiss Alive. You know, it can't be better than that. You know, it's
No,
unbelievable.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
And then about over the Christmas period, 1978, we had a TV show out here called Sounds Unlimited, which was like a weekly music show on Saturday mornings. And over the Christmas period, when they sort of went off the air, but they would do like little special packages, specials to show. And I remember over that Christmas period of 1978, one of the specials they showed was a Kiss special, and it was the Kiss in Japan, Budokan 1977
Mm.
concert. And aside from that, he also sort of showed things like the Alive 2 promo reel, and then the host, Donnie Sutherland, would sort of come up every few songs and would sort of tell about each Kiss member. And I remember that was like a real big turning point for Kiss in Australia, because a few weeks later, when I went back to school to start up for the next year, you know, everyone in the school in my class was talking about it, like, oh, I saw that band that you were telling me about ages ago, Kiss, you know, on that show. That was amazing. And so it was really interesting. There was kind of like this real anticipation of, wow, their fandom's really growing. And, you know, there was always that expectation that their next album was probably going to be a big one out here. But, you know, no one really expected it to be as big as what it turned out to be with Dynasty, because
Right. Yeah.
Dynasty, I think, came along and it not only sort of caught the wave of Kiss fans that were slowly sort of growing in the country, but because of I Was Made for Loving You, it also tapped into sort of the young teen audience. So,
Hmm.
you know, that album just did a lot bigger than I think even most Kiss fans were really expecting.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just a great time just to be a young Kiss fan in Australia, you know, that 1979, 1980 period. You know, Kiss were my first concert when they came out here in November 1980, and I had to beg my parents to let me go. And just being around, you know, you probably hear stories of over there about Kiss in 1980 Australia, and it really was just like, you know, the closest thing to Beatlemania. They were literally like everywhere on every TV show and every magazine coverage. And, you know, being a fan that had been around for a couple of years, to finally see them, you know, being embraced by everyone was really like a real proud
Beautiful.
moment.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, and now Kiss is everywhere. And this is interesting because I've said it oftentimes on the show, Kiss fans have so many things in common. And, you know, as a child myself, I was always into horror movies and sci-fi movies. And I remember in our laneway, Kiss talking about the demon and the child and the star child, and I had to look and I had to learn more, you know? And that's how I got into Kiss. My first album was Destroyer, to see those comic book heroes on the album with the
Yeah.
devastated city in the background, man. It's like I was hooked for life. And
Mhm.
now at 56 years old, everywhere you turn, it's Kiss. We just live in this world, and it's a Kiss world, you
Yeah.
know. So,
Absolutely.
speaking of which, in your opinion, at what point do you believe that Kiss became a part of pop culture, and you believe it was necessary for the survival of the band?
Well, I think firstly, yeah, the first part, I guess around the Paul Lynde Halloween special was when they really started to
Mm.
immerse themselves as part of the pop culture. You know, that was their first primetime American TV appearance, and they were also like appearing with other pop culture icons of the time, like you know, the Wicked Witch of the West and Witchy Pooh from HR Puff and stuff, the Osmonds, you know, Florence Henderson from the Brady Bunch. Paul Lynde himself, you know, was a big part of pop culture at the time. So I think definitely that period from like 76 to 78 is when they really sort of ingrained themselves. And also, obviously, the first Marvel comic in 1977 really sort of helped make that transition as well. So, you know, I think definitely, yeah, 76 to, you know, 78 was when they really made that leap from like being just a, you know, another sort of rock band to being something a bit more. You know, as they used to say, you know, you never saw Marvel Comics presents the Eagles or Marvel Comics presents
Right.
Fleetwood Mac. You know, that's when they became more than just a rock band. And I know a lot of fans, you know, even my brother-in-law who turned me on to Kiss, you know, once they started coming out with stuff like that, you know, he sort of started to back off a little bit. And you hear that story about a lot of the older fans, you know, maybe getting a little bit disillusioned when they, you know, softened their sound a bit. But for me, you know, being someone that loved comics and loved horror movies and things like that and fantasy, you know, it was just a natural combination for me.
Mhm. You know, and you know, personally, I don't think that, for example, Star Trek or Star Wars has a cult following because really it's consumed by the masses. Now, do you
Mm.
believe that Kiss has a cult following, or really are they a band for everybody?
I think there may be a bit of both, you know, as with Star Wars and Star Trek. I mean, yeah, Star Wars and Star Trek have got, you know, millions upon millions of fans, but you know, most of them are, a lot of them are probably the fans that will just, you know, not think about it until like there's a new Star Wars movie coming out, and then they'll say, "Oh, there's a new Star Wars out, let's go and see it." And then you've got like a smaller percentage of those fans that are like just the absolute sort of diehards that are like, you know, whether there's a new movie on the horizon or not, you know, they're always like watching the movies, they're always like reading about it, they're always collecting things. So I think in that way, you know, Kiss is very similar. You know, they've got their like their sort of core fan base, which are like very dedicated and die hard, but you've also got the, you know, the casuals that like whenever, I mean, obviously now they've finished touring, but you know, would always be when Kiss is coming to town, you know, there was always that certain section of people that maybe weren't hardcore Kiss fans, but they were just like, oh, Kiss is coming, let's go see him, you know, because it's like Star Wars and like Star Trek, a Kiss concert was something you could always depend on for just giving you a good night's entertainment and, you know, just letting you sort of forget your troubles for the evening. So I think, you know, it is an interesting question because, yeah, as you said, you know, Kiss probably too big to be called a cult band, like say, you know, like the Ramones or the New York Dolls, you know, that never really attained any huge level in terms of popularity or record sales. But at the same time, I think they do have like a cult level of devotion in terms of like the fans that are really into them, just, you know, are all in basically.
Right, right. Now imagine, you know, a band in the late 70s coming out with dolls and radios and comic books. I mean, come on, this isn't rock and roll, right? Again, do you
Yeah.
believe that if it wasn't for the merchandising, if it wasn't for Kiss trying to immerse themselves into everything, that they wouldn't last 50 years?
Probably not. No, I mean they may have lasted a bit longer in America in terms of like their initial wave of popularity because I think that that sort of overexposure that they subjected themselves to and that over merchandising from the, you know, 78 to 79 is what probably led to their initial backlash and also the softening of their sound with Dynasty and Unmasked. But I think had they like not gone that route and just maybe released a couple of more albums like Love Gun or Destroyer, you know, it may have held the fans on for a bit longer in the short term. But, you know, again, I don't think there would have been that sort of legend behind them, you know, in the ensuing years.
Yeah.
True, true. And you know, speaking of 78, you know, we're slowly getting into a very interesting topic, very related to movies. So, John, you wrote an article in a magazine called Cinema of the 70s, issue 10, where you wrote an article called An Overview of 70s Rock Cinema. And you discussed in that article Kiss Meets the Phantom. And what is your take on that movie? I mean, is it really, can you consider that movie as a cult classic?
I think a cult classic for Kiss fans. You know, I'm not. You know,
True.
I've got the enough sense to know that, you know, if you're not a Kiss fan, you'll probably watch it and scratch your head and think, you know, oh, this movie is, rubbish. I mean, I've shown it to a few non-Kiss fans that are like, oh, it's a bit of fun. And I think a lot of people that aren't Kiss fans still enjoy it if they grew up in that era, because it's just so drenched in like 1970s. For myself, because out here we never saw it on TV, it came out at the cinemas here in 1979 as Kiss in Attack of the Phantoms, where they like recut it a bit and they took out a lot of the incidental music and replaced it with tracks from the solo albums. And before the screenings, they showed the video clips of "I Was Made for Loving You" and "Sure Knows Something" on the big screen. So there was definitely like that was a great period. It did so well out here. Like was pretty much playing at cinemas and drive-ins for over a year straight, just to cash in on the huge wave of hysteria out here. So,
Right.
certainly for me, yeah, I've got like a fond memory of it. And I think, how you do react to the movie does depend on A, whether you're a Kiss fan, and, B, when you first saw it. They call it a minor cult movie, certainly, and a
Yeah.
cult movie if you are a Kiss fan. Although, again, I also know a lot of Kiss fans really hated it. And, I know at the time a lot of fans sort of thought that was really when, they really started to, like, I guess, turn the tide as such, because a lot of their older fans did think, when you look at Kiss from, say, the hotter than hell period, they were like very sort of dangerous and dark. And then
Yeah.
suddenly, within a few short years, and I think we sort of forget sometimes too that because they put out so many albums, like 6 years, 6 studio albums in like, 3 years. When you look back, it tends to feel like, or tends to look like, a lot longer period than it really was, but
Sure.
that was a lot of records in just 2 or 3 years. And
That
they
is
went
true.
through so many changes in that time. And I can sort of understand why Ace and Peter sort of at that point wanted to say, hey, let's slow down a little bit and just enjoy the success, whereas
Yeah.
Gene and Paul are obviously all about, no, let's keep going, more work, more
Yeah.
albums. Maybe it was a case of them realizing that bands like themselves maybe have a limited lifespan in the initial run. I mean, at that time, rock and roll was still fairly new. We didn't really have any bands that were like, in their 40s and 50s even still going. Whereas now, you've got the Stones who are in their 80s and still touring. So I think a lot more people are a lot more open to sort of rock bands sort of playing at an older age now. Whereas back then in the 70s, it was pretty much considered, a rock band to be popular for a few years, and then they'd usually, decline. Got to give them, a lot of props for being so determined and riding out the tough periods and really sort of reinventing themselves over and over again.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think during those times it was part of the strategy, right? So they had to reach out to as many people as possible and being everywhere, so that's why they were kind of, putting out records, every 6 months. So if we go back to the article that you wrote, what's the, besides what you wrote for Kiss Meets the Phantom, so what's the overall theme of the article that
The article is more, as the title mentioned, more just an overview of like the whole 70s rock and roll movie scene. So it covers things like the, documentaries from the early 70s, things like the Woodstock documentary, and also Give Me Shelter, the documentary on the infamous Rolling Stones concert at Altamont in 1969, which ended in, violence because they hired the Hells Angels to be security guards, and they ended up stabbing someone to death, unfortunately, in front of the stage. So, and that's, one of my favorite documentaries, as brutal as it is. That's an incredible doco. But it also looks at movies like Phantom of the Paradise, the De Palma movie that has Paul Williams, which is also has like a very Kiss-like group in it as well that, some people say may have been influenced by Kiss, even though De Palma claims he never wasn't aware of Kiss at the time. But I did talk to someone who did say that apparently De Palma was aware of them because he and Bill Aucoin had a history going back a few years. And apparently at one stage, even when Brian De Palma was first planning the movie, he wanted to use the Beacon Theatre in New York to film the live concert sequences, and was pretty much on the verge of like nabbing it. But then he found out Bill Aucoin had sort of grabbed it for himself because he wanted to use it for those Kiss showcase gigs. And apparently that led to a bit of bad blood between Brian De Palma and Bill Aucoin and Neil Vogel. Years. So yeah, there was some interesting sort of info like that I dug up during my research for both the article and the book. And, you know, also look at other films from around the same era as Kiss Meets the Fan of the Park. So things like the ill-fated Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band movie with the Bee Gees, and Rock and Roll High School with the Ramones, Tommy, the Who movie, you know, so basically it covers all of that sort of landscape from the 70s, which was a pretty dense period in terms of rock movies and rock docos. You know, there was Led Zeppelin, The Song Remains the Same. So certainly a big diversity of movies about
great.
music.
That's great. And do you have any plans to have it released? Because we haven't seen it yet on Amazon. So is there any?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not the publisher. You know, I just write for it. But yeah, it has come out. I know it's out in other countries, so I'm not sure why it's not on Amazon in Canada. But yeah, I've got a copy of it sort of sitting here beside me. So yeah, it's definitely has been out for a while.
Okay.
I'll touch base with them though and ask them. Maybe they forgot to like add it to Amazon. Are the previous issues on Amazon Canada? Do you know?
You have to do some digging. I did find it. I found issue 9. I clicked on that, and then at the bottom it had a whole bunch of other issues, including 10. But you just can't do a search for issue 10. It'll come up. You got to dig for some reason.
Okay, that's interesting. I might let them know just in case there's something they haven't done or something they need to follow up on. You know, with Amazon, it can be a little bit tricky like that. Sometimes you do really need to dig around, and sometimes you'll just come up with it, you know, by fluke.
Yeah, exactly. Now, apart from that, you also write a blog called Sin Street Sleeves. So what's the general idea behind this blog?
It's mainly just, I guess it was a way to just, initially I put it up there just as a way to, you know, put up some writing that hadn't been published elsewhere, or also just to mainly promote my own sort of stuff. You know, I work as a Blu-ray audio commentator, and I write like booklets for Blu-ray releases and that over here and in America and England. So it was mainly just a way to, you know, keep things like that and just let people know about what's coming up. You know, it is, I guess, you know, Facebook seems to be still the most popular way to reach people. You know, it's just a reality, unfortunately. You know, as much as I sometimes hate Facebook, you know, the reality is that, you know, you put a post on Facebook and it's probably going to be seen by more people than if you like pay someone to take out an ad in a magazine. And, you know, but I still like having the blog just as a way to sort of keep it all there in one go, and, you know, just as a one sort of stop place for people to sort of search through. Facebook goes down or something someday, you know, I've got a backup of everything.
Yeah. I was going through this blog, and as I was going through it, I noticed a book series called Rock and Roll Nightmares. And you wrote a short story about Kiss called Kiss Face Off. Tell us about that.
Yes. Yeah, so Rock and Roll Nightmares, it's a series of books edited by a great lady in Las Vegas called Stacey Lane Wilson, who has a bit of a rock and roll background herself. Her father was Don Wilson from the Ventures, the classic influential surf group from the 60s. And her mother was also like a model on a lot of the Venture record cover albums. So she does like these series of rock and roll nightmares, and every sort of book is usually devoted to a different subject. Some are fiction, some are non-fiction. The one that she asked me to contribute to, Parallel Lines, is kind of like, I don't know if you've ever read the old Marvel comics, What If? You know, which sort of looked at, you know, what if Spider-Man didn't get bitten by a radioactive spider, or what if the Hulk was red instead of green, things like that. So she put that to me and said, have you got any interesting ideas? And I thought, yeah, look, it's not my sort of usual style of writing, but it is sort of nice sometimes to go out of your comfort zone and, you know, push yourself with something different. So I kind of came up with the idea of, you know, what if Kiss took off their makeup back in 1978 at the height of their popularity? And to write the story, I thought it would be fun to write it in the style of like an old teen magazine report from the day, you know, because again, growing up in the 70s, you know, I was always buying issues of 16 and Teen Beat and all that had Kiss on the cover. And, you know, the stories were always so silly and puff pieces, you know, the way they were written. But I thought that could be a fun way to sort of approach it. And yeah, I was pretty happy with the way it came out. You know, it was a lot of fun writing it. And I also did like, came up with my own sort of fake magazine cover, you know, to go along with the article and everything. So yeah, definitely a lot of fun.
Yeah, that one I found on Amazon, and I bought myself a copy. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Oh, nice. Yeah, there's some other great stories on there as well. Yeah. So, but yeah, that was a lot of fun to do that. hope you enjoy it. And there is an audio book of it as well out, which is good. So it's always interesting to hear your work sort of being read and interpreted by other people.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Where can you find the audiobook?
If you go to Stacey Lane Wilson's page, if you look for her or on her website, or I can send you the link as well afterwards, definitely.
Oh, cool.
And speaking of books, so let's talk about Creatures of the Screen. So when is this book planned to be released?
Well, it's pretty much finished. So I'm just like proofing it and editing at the moment. It's pretty lengthy, it sort of grew as it went along. So at the moment it's about 180,000 words. And yeah, so, I hope to have it out through Bear Manor Media around October. I sort of thought maybe a Halloween would be a good time for it. So yeah, again, just going through and just editing it and proofing it at the moment. So definitely not too far off. There is a few sort of guest essays from other contributors. So I'm just waiting on one more to come in, which is someone contacted me and said they did an interview with Gordon Hessler, the director of Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, who's now deceased, but they'd interviewed him about 10 years ago and said, look, if you want, I can dig up that interview and transcribe the bits where he talks about the Kiss movie and send it over if you want to use it. So once that sort of is received and put in, then yeah, the book's pretty much done.
Okay. And without disclosing too much information, can you give us a little teaser of the book?
Sure. Well, I mean, again, I guess being a film fan and a writer of film, and I've always wanted to maybe one day write about Kiss, but I didn't want to write like another book about, just their music or whatever, or the usual stuff. There's been so many books written about Kiss over the years. But being a film fan, I thought, okay, maybe I can do a book looking at Kiss from like or purely from their like cinematic and television point of view. So the book itself is broken up into three main sections, I guess. The first section is like, I guess, my version of the history of Kiss, but told primarily through their history of like appearances on screen, on television, on home video as well in the 80s when they were putting out all those great home video releases like Kiss Exposed, and then in the 90s. Then we've got a section on all the documentaries, some of the fan-made documentaries. I interviewed Andrew Scambidi, who's made a few great fan documentaries in recent years, and also interviewed Bill Baker, who was the subject of a film called Kiss Loves You. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
Yeah.
A bit of a strange sort of documentary. It's very sort of, not completely sort of enamored with Kiss, but Bill Baker was like a big fan who collected a lot of Ace Frehley's original memorabilia and got to befriend him over the course of a few years, and then had sort of a bit of a turn when Kiss reunited, and Ace pretty much turned his back on all his old friends. So he was sort of an interesting person to interview as well. And then the third section of the book looks at all the films and TV shows that Kiss aren't actually in, but were clearly inspired or influenced by Kiss. So going back to the 70s, there was like episodes of The Incredible Hulk and Scooby-Doo. And then in the early 80s, there was episode of Chips. And that featured, very Kiss-like characters that were clearly inspired by the band. And I thought that's a good way to sort of approach and write about that and how they influenced a lot of the other outside movies and TV shows. And also looking at things like the Chips episode, which was made in like 1982, which I also thought was fairly interesting because Kiss were pretty much like forgotten about in America at that point. So for a major TV show to still be saying, hey, let's, use Kiss as a influence for this show, I thought was pretty interesting. And even, going into the 90s pre-reunion, there's a great episode of Homicide: Life on the Streets about a couple of Kiss fan from Norway who is going to like a party in New York in Gene Simmons makeup, and he's had a few drinks and he gets lost and he knocks on the wrong door and starts sort of ranting in Norwegian to the homeowner, who freaks out and shoots him dead. And then the whole episode is, was he justified, or, did he use excessive force? So even things like that coming, 2 or 3 years before the reunion, I think was interesting, and kind of showed that there was that sort of groundswell of interest, building up again for Kiss, particularly for, their older stuff. And I think that's ultimately what led to, Gene and Paul doing the reunion.
Right. Well, that's so interesting. I can't wait, to be released. That's going to be awesome. Awesome.
Ah, cool. Yeah, I hope people enjoy it. It's listening to it while I'm, editing and I'm proofing it. It's kind of like an enjoyable read, I think. And yeah, hopefully a lot of fans, Well, even if they, even if a lot of diehard Kiss fans don't learn anything new about Kiss, they might learn about the other stuff, the films that they influenced, and vice versa. The film fans who might buy it for all the other stuff might hopefully learn something about Kiss when reading it, and through that might hopefully go and listen to some of their music and watch some of their older TV appearances.
Totally.
And things like the Midnight Special, where they were just absolutely on fire in those early days, where people that say, oh, Kiss were never good live, I just show them that and just crank it up and say, now tell me they weren't good live,
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah. There was an episode of Quantum Leap that had Kiss-related makeup.
That's right. Yeah, with Peter Noon from Hermit's Hermits. He sort of wears Ace Frehley type makeup in it, and that's really interesting too, because a lot of the when you watch it, a lot of the promo material for the fake band in the show, they've actually like used the original Kiss debut album, and they've just sort of like colored over the Kiss members' guys with the people in the show. And there's a scene where they do like a big Q&A appearance in a shopping mall, and the big cardboard standee behind them of the band is clearly like a standee of the Destroyer album cover that they've just like painted over the other designs of the people in the film in the TV show. But yeah, that was a great episode and great show too, really creative. And
I loved it.
And even there's even one scene in that show where the Scott Bakula guy is ready to go on stage in the makeup, and he's panicking because he's going, I got no idea what a rock star does. And the Dean Stockwell character, who's like his guide, says, look, if you get stuck, just start sticking out your tongue and go crazy for that. So, it's obviously, the Kiss, because people can say, well, maybe it was inspired by Alice Cooper or David Bowie, and maybe partly it was. But when you see things like that and hear lines like that, you know full well who the main inspiration behind it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a result of your book, you had the opportunity to work with some pretty talented people. What are your thoughts, for example, of illustrator Paul Gardner?
He's great. Yeah, he does a lot of stuff for another magazine that I write for in England called We Belong Dead, which is mainly like horror movie related films and television. And he's done the covers for a few books that I've contributed to. And he's really good at doing that kind of Mad Magazine kind of satire send up. So I had him do an illustration of Gene Simmons fighting Godzilla above the Budokan, which I thought would be good in the section where I talk about the original broadcast of the Kiss live in Japan TV special from 1977, and I kind of like put that in as this would be the ultimate KISSploitation movie back then, seeing Gene Simmons and Godzilla fighting. But no, he's great. I love his style.
Did he do the cover for your book?
I know the cover for my book is done by a local artist called Peter Savieri, who's he's fantastic. He did wonderfully on the book cover, which basically has the members of the band sort of from behind, because being an unofficial or unauthorized book, I think best to keep the makeup off the cover and the logo, just to cover your bases there. But yeah, sort of having them sort of sitting back and watching a bank of television screens with different scene from a different Kiss-related exploitation movie was a good sort of concept, and he really did well in bringing it to life for me. So yeah, I was very happy with his cover.
Cool. And you also had the opportunity to interview Carl Dupree, the screenwriter for Detroit Rock City. Tell us about him.
That's right. Yeah, he was great. Had a great chat with him, and he's a Kiss fan from way back. I believe first saw them on the Alive 2 tour, which would have been a great introduction to the band. And he actually wrote the script on spec. Where it wasn't where someone had come to him and said, "Hey, do you want to write a screenplay about Kiss?" He was working as an assistant editor and just writing his Kiss screenplay pre the reunion, and then. Basically, when the reunion came about, and he mentioned it to someone when he was in the editing room, and through that, managed to get it into the hands of one of the producers of Detroit Rock City, who read it and then called him up and said, "Oh, the script is great, and Gene really loves it too." And as he was saying, he sort of thought for a second, "Hang on, who's Gene?" And then he said, "Gene Simmons, of course." And he was like, "Oh my God, Gene read my script and likes it." So yeah, he was great, and very interesting to. Hear his take on, how the process went with writing it and getting it off the ground, and obviously the disappointing reception of it initially. It unfortunately, wasn't the huge hit that it could have been, and we do sort of talk a bit about that. It was initially I believe, going to be released earlier in that year, where it may have done a little bit better, but they found out that the Star Wars prequel was opening up. I think the Phantom Menace was going to be opening up around that same time, so they thought, well, you know, nothing's going to compete at that point, so we'll keep it to later in the year. But I think if it maybe came, you know, a year or so earlier, it may have done a lot better. But, you know, I think by that time, late 1998, just after Psycho Circus had come out, you know, I think maybe some of the, you know, the initial buzz and hysteria of the reunion had sort of started to die down a little bit. Whereas if it had come out maybe a year or so earlier, it might have caught that initial wave of fandom and popularity that they just experienced after the reunion. But, you know, it has become that one, I think, has become a bit of a cult classic, you know, because there are a lot of fans that I know that, you know, aren't particular Kiss fans, but do love that movie. You know, it's very much like in the vein of the Dazed and Confused and movies like that, you know, just people that just love movies about 70s rock and about 70s stoners. Because it's got all the other great songs on the soundtrack as well, you know, I think it appeals to a much wider audience. So, yeah, it's certainly good. And I think he's happy to see that it's, you know, it's lived on and, you know, become a bit of a cult classic these days. Wanted to do a sequel as well, which would basically look at the four lead characters, you know, back in 1996, you know, when the reunion comes along and they sort of get back together to go to a reunion show, and you know that would have been fantastic.
I would have loved that.
Great idea.
Yeah, unfortunately, when the first film didn't really, you know, do as expected, you know, those plans sort of fell through, unfortunately.
Great idea. You know, John, we wanted to take the opportunity to, you know, having the luxury of having you on the show. We wanted to ask your opinion on several Kiss movies. So first, you mentioned before Scooby-Doo, which is interesting. So do you believe that the Scooby-Doo and Kiss animated feature did for young fans what the Paul Lynde special did for Kiss in the 70s? Is there any parallelism there?
It's an interesting question. I think, you know, a lot of kids, I mean, Scooby-Doo, I think, was definitely like aimed primarily at kids, whereas Paul Lynde was more like a, you know, a nighttime, you know, prime time sort of audience, whereas Scooby-Doo is more like your Saturday morning kiddie feature. But, you know, I like a lot, I know a lot of people that have got, I don't have kids myself, but I know a lot of people that do have children that, you know, love the Scooby-Doo and Kiss movie. And I think it's also great as well. You know, I think it's a fun movie, and you know, it's got some great. It's unfortunate they used the re-recording tracks, you know, rather than the originals on the soundtrack, even though I can understand why. But you know, I think it's fun. It's got some good humor to it. I think in terms of like a movie, the way it's written is a lot better than Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park. And you know, I think anything that can help keep the Kiss name, you know, there amongst younger kids, younger people, is always going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, like I've watched it a few times when I was writing about it for the book, and you know, I always get a laugh out of it and a smile.
That's true. That's true.
And again, you know, Kiss and Scooby-Doo do have that a bit of a history, because there was that episode from 1977, The Diabolical Disc Demon, it's called, where a character with Gene Simmons-like makeup haunts a record pressing plant, and the guy who voiced that guy, the Disc Demon, Michael Bell, was actually also the guy who dubbed Peter Criss's voice in Kiss Meets the Phantom.
Wow.
There's a parallel there. And yeah, and I've got an interview with him in the book, which was great. So yeah, so that was a really interesting parallel as well.
Look at that. Wow.
But, you know, he did like literally, you know, hundreds of voices. So it wasn't anything really, you know, unusual for him. He was just, you know, the go-to guy when they wanted someone to dub a voice or to provide a cartoon voice. But yeah, it just so happened, you know, he did both voices.
Yeah. And, you know, speaking of that and going back to Scooby-Doo, you know, many fans, you know, call like the last Kiss song recorded by the band, you know, "Don't Touch My Ascot." So, and then some fans were really upset with it. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, look, you know, would I have loved a nice, you know, a great sort of classic hard rock single as their last song? Sure, but you know, that's Kiss. I think that's one of the unique things about them. And when I think about it, you know, I think, yeah, it's a cute little song. I got no problem with it. You know, it's you know, I think it's just typical Kiss. It's something to, you know, it's something totally different to what most other people would do. And
True.
it's a great scene in the movie as well, where he plays it, because that's Fred's favorite band. And, so yeah, again, it's, and I got to admit, Eric Singer has a great voice in it as well, for that style of barbershop sort of quartet. Eric Singer's voice in particular really stands out on that
fits.
track.
And
again, if I had my way, it wouldn't be my, my ultimate sort of choice for a final Kiss song, but it is what it is, and I'll enjoy it that way. Yeah.
I want to go back to Detroit Rock City for a second, because you mentioned that, it wasn't a financial success. So in your opinion, is the story of Kiss better told in a movie format or better told in a documentary format like the A&E special?
Yeah, I think it would be better told in a documentary format if all four of them were involved, and that's really the sad thing I found about the A&E documentary is there was those great scenes where it was Gene and Paul sitting down at Electric Lady studio and, just talking and reminiscing. And I thought, I would just love to see, 2 or 3 hours of just all four band members just sitting down like that and just, shooting the breeze about, their days, and, do it before it's too late while they're still around, and can still do it. So yeah, I think it would best be suited in a documentary format like that. If all four aren't going to be involved, then it would need to be, I think, a movie, but one that again, that maybe Gene and Paul aren't so much involved with, because again, if they're on as producers or creative consultants, it's just natural. It's always the narrative's always gonna, I guess, take their sort of viewpoint as such. And I think a little bit disappointing, that's the case, even though I can understand that that's why they would do that, because, you're brought on, you are going to give your opinion and your sort of viewpoint on things and how you remember things. But, I still hold out that, maybe someday they'll all just get together and, just again, I don't need anything fancy, just the four of them just sitting in a room and just talking, for a few hours.
Yeah.
I mean, some of those early times, when they were just sleeping together in motel rooms and, driving to gigs together in a car, just hearing about those days would be incredible.
Yeah. So, John, one final question on movies. So, there's many fans who are rushing out to see The Fall Guy because, I Was Made for Loving You. It was heavily featured in that movie. So, and, it's funny because, you were talking before how huge, I Was Made for Loving You was in Australia. So do you believe that this is a good way to keep Kiss in pop culture today, with more of their music being featured in mainstream movies?
Sure. I think anything that keeps the Kiss music in the minds of people is a good thing. And I was reading something just the other day about how the Spotify plays or sales of Always Made for Loving You have, shot right up in the last couple of months. And primarily, I imagine, due to The Fall Guy, but also was also used in the last Godzilla v. Kong movie as well.
Right.
I mean, it would be nice as a Kiss fan to hear some more obscure or different songs in movies. Always Made for Loving You seems to be, the go-to song for filmmakers that want to use Kiss. So it would be nice to hear some other songs and, some more obscurities. But, if it's still like, gets the name out there and people go home and humming the tune and thinking, let's see what else they've done, and listening to some of their other stuff, then it can only be a good thing as far as I'm aware. Especially now that they're not touring, anymore. They do need something to sort of keep themselves in the public eye. And again, you look at like after that came out in the 80s, Kiss would never, I don't think they played that song live, until like Hot in the Shade tour. So for about 10 years, they sort of like completely ignored that song because they felt it was one of the things that led to their downfall in popularity in America. And, now it's like become pretty much one of their signature songs. And I think that's just the staying power of a song that's a good song, regardless of who sings it or plays on it.
True.
And it's one of those songs that, as soon as you hear it, if you're in a club or something, you just can't help to get up and dance to it. And, if you're sitting watching it in a movie, you just can't help but, start tapping your feet to it. It's a great song and it's stood the test of time.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So, John, before we close the curtain on this episode, I want to ask you a few more questions related to Kiss fandom. So first, on the show, we've often said that, it's the Kiss fans we're going to keep the memory of Kiss alive in the future, now that Kiss has reached the end of the road. Do you believe that this is true? Do you believe that it's enough just for fans to keep the Kiss memory alive? Or do we have to go back to what Kiss did in the 70s? It has to be merchandising coming out where Kiss dies. What do you think?
I think the important thing is that the music just has to survive. That's the most important thing. And, for sure, fans, it's only natural that we're going to get older and slowly disappear, so it's important that younger fans get turned on to the music. So it's always good when I went to Kiss shows to see, people there with their kids and taking their whole family along. And, hopefully, Kiss fandom will continue that way. But, I think the main thing is, they've got to keep the music coming out and keep the music sort of covered, I guess, in terms of, having it, Kiss were never like big in terms of being played on radio as such. For the most part, but just to have some musical programmers, some authors, just music historians, just keeping the name out there. I don't think it's enough just to rely on the fans. I think definitely there's got to be some, some music critics and some music publications that need to sort of keep the band in the public eye, in the coming years. Again, now that, they're not touring, normally when they did a tour, you could guarantee that there'd be some magazines that would cover them. Whereas now there's not that option. But, through things like The Fall Guy, and having that song in the movie, people will start writing about them that way. And, any way you can keep the name out there, I think is important to, I guess, I think their legacy as such is probably intact. No one can take away what they did in the 70s and, again, what they did in the 90s when they reunited. I think all that stuff will definitely be, the stuff of rock and roll history and rock and roll legend. But it would be a shame to see if their stature did sort of disappear over the years. But, I think there's always going to be a core, following of, hardcore fans that will keep the name and the music alive.
No, I mean, Kiss fans are amazing at keeping the memory alive, through books, through podcasts, through organizing Kiss expos and stuff. But, I agree, the Kiss machine has to keep going in one way or another, I think, for the memory of Kiss to continue.
And it'll be interesting to see now that Pop House sort of own, the name and that, what they'll do. Hopefully they'll continue putting out the archival stuff, which is, what I was a real big fan of, the Creature and Destroyer deluxe box sets, with all the outtakes and the booklets and that, and even the off the soundboard releases, were great. Although I would have liked maybe a bit better design to their covers and that, to make them a bit more photogenic and attractive. But that stuff seems to have stopped now that the Pop House have taken over the name and the logo and that. But maybe they're just resetting and planning a strategy. But we'll see what brings the next couple of years. I mean, they're talking about the avatars, which I'm not real big fan of, but who knows, that could catch on and could expose them to a whole new sort of audience as well. I certainly wouldn't write it off, but I need to see a bit more to be convinced. I was a little bit disappointed with the last show that they didn't really give any kind of nod or mention to the past members that really made their success happen. It is what it is, though.
Yeah. Hey, listen, confession time. John, I'm a high school teacher, and one way I keep the memory of Kiss alive is by pushing the Kiss name to my students. I do that all the time, talk about Kiss to my kids. And my kids often, tell me, hey, Mr. Vera, you're so obsessed. You're part of a cult. Do you agree with my students? Am I part of a cult? Are Kiss fans part of a cult? Or is this just a passion that we have?
I think it's just a passion. I mean, Kiss fans in general, I think, are very friendly. Like, I've never seen Kiss fans like really Kiss concerts and that fighting like I have at, AC/DC concerts or Motorhead concerts. Kiss fans, it's a really sense of family and camaraderie. Like, if you meet another Kiss fan in the street, you can always just start talking to them, even if you've got nothing else in common. You just bond over Kiss, and it's definitely a special bond. I think that very few bands really generate in fans. Maybe Elvis and the Beatles and a couple of others, but I think it's just more a positivity thing. It's more positive. You're not pushing anything that's negative. You're pushing something that's just fun. And again, a lot of young people, I think, if given the chance, they would get right into Kiss. So, I think keep doing it.
So, John, you mentioned that you weren't crazy about the idea of the avatars. So imagine, after the end of the road, Gene takes off the makeup, comes up to you, Mr. John Harrison. What do we do next? What do you tell him?
I would say again, just I guess work on your legacy and maybe just even do like a few, like I'd love to see him just bring up some of the older stuff, some of the unused demos tracks and clean those up a bit. And maybe, I know Paul can't sing as well as what he used to, but there's still some of those great songs in the vault that came out on the, the Destroyer special edition that I think if they just cleaned those up and, laid down new instrumental tracks and kept Paul's vocals and, remastered them a bit, that could make a great new album, kind of like what the Stones did initially with way back in 1981 when they did Tattoo You, which was basically like just a bunch of demos left over from like 10 years earlier that they didn't think much of. And, they managed to create one of their best albums in their history out of that. And that's what I'd like to see them do. And also, again, just, focus more on just the, I guess the original group, and mending, I guess, mending the bridges between them as well. I kind of feel that's a little bit sad, as funny as it is sometimes to see what they say about each other. I think it is kind of sad to see that, they really can't do an interview without, having a go at the former members, these are people that I sort of grew up really, admiring and loving. I liked all of them. I loved Derek Carr as well. And to hear Paul sort of say in the A&E doco that, his character didn't work, when they did the Fox, and that's why they don't do new makeup. And I'm like, that's not true, Paul. I mean, in 1980 out here, everyone loved Derek Carr. He was the Kiss drummer to a lot of us because he was the first drummer that came out at that time, and he had fans all over the world, that loved the Fox.
Yeah. It's interesting what you just said. I can't agree more with you. That's exactly what I would love to see. I would love to see them like, the four of them, peacefully talking, no grudges there. So why, we can't have a nice closure, for the Kiss fans to see all those four guys, laying on a couch and then talking and, that would be awesome. And the same thing that you said before. So in my case, the direction for Kiss in the future, I would really love to see more music coming out. There's so much stuff. And not so long ago, we had a discussion panel, or we will have a discussion panel on kind of demos and greatest hits. What about if we come with greatest hits, from fans, from unreleased song? There's so much material there, man. It's unbelievable. And if you polish it up, if you clean it up a little bit, that could be awesome for the Kiss fans, and it's, to me, that's the way to keep them alive. So that's really interesting.
Some of those older songs like Smoke, that demo from the Destroyer sessions, it ain't the smoke that burns you. That's a great, Don't You Hesitate, great stuff, and
but even
really
from the 80s,
like Kiss classics.
But
the
even
80s
from
as
the
well.
80s, there's so much stuff out there. So it's amazing. Hey John, let me tell you, it's been an immense pleasure to have you on the show. I learned a lot about you and your work, not only about the Kiss fandom. So we always say with Past that. Of course, this is a Kiss-related podcast, but we love to connect with other stuff that our guests, are into it. And you have so much stuff going on, so we can wait for the book to come out. And once again, thank you for your time, and it's been great, and it's been fantastic.
No, it was great chatting to you, and we'll catch up again when the book's out, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. I'll keep you up to date with it.
John, I want our listeners to know that at the time of this recording, we started recording at 6 o'clock in the morning Eastern. And I was going to go to bed after the interview, and now I can't.
Now you can't.
I'm freaking back up, man. This was such an interesting discussion. I personally, I love movies, pop culture, and all that stuff. And, having my two favorite passions come together like this, it's just always an amazing discussion. And so glad to have you on the show and to have this discussion with you, because when I saw the promo for your book, I thought this would be perfect. And I'm so looking forward to reading this book because it meshes all of my passions together. going to be fantastic. So
Excellent.
thanks again.
Perfect. No, I appreciate you saying that. That's great. It's the kind of reaction I'm hoping for. So yeah, happy to hear that. He himself grew up, Gene loved horror movies growing up. He read Famous Monsters and
Exactly.
he produced his own fanzines, before Kiss, and I've got a great story in the book of a guy who published or still publishes a fanzine devoted to Hammer horror films called Little Shop of Horrors,
Right.
which he started publishing in the 70s in Des Moines, Illinois, is it? Or somewhere in the Midwest there. But he was saying, he sort of shared a great story about in 1977 when Kiss were passing through there, and Gene Simmons looked him up because he was a reader of his fanzine and got his phone number and gave him a call and said, are you doing anything at the moment? And Richard Clemenson said no. And then the next thing he knew, this big limo pulled up in front of his house, and Gene got out with Star Stowe, his girlfriend at the time, who was just about to become a Playboy playmate, and Big John Hart. And, Gene came in and spent like an hour or so just looking through his collection of stuff, and even left with a couple of his books from his collection. And the amazing thing was Gene actually insisted on paying for them, even though Richard had said he's welcome to take them. But that's something you probably wouldn't hear from Gene these days. Because obviously that was when Kiss were brand new superstars. He was probably loving having all this money to splash and, just hanging out with fellow, horror fans. And that was just a great story as well.
Nice.
Super.
See, we could do another hour on this, no problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Amazing.
We'll have you again. We'll have you again when the book is going to come out. For
Absolutely.
Sure, that'd be great. Awesome.
Yeah. So once again, John, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
See ya.
To the Kiss Army, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please send them to talktome@kissarmynationpodcast.com. Until the next time, remember, never stop rocking. Take care, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and X. You can watch us on YouTube or listen to us on Podomatic, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. This is about you, so please like and subscribe to support the amazing guests we have on the show. See you soon, Kiss Army.